My wife told me I was selfish because I would not give one of my kidneys to her ex-boyfriend's 16-year-old son. 3 days later, I filed one hospital compliance report. By the end of that afternoon, she was removed from every transplant case she supervised. People would later say my report ended Dr. Claire Bennett's career. It didn't. The report only forced North River University Medical Center to examine what its star transplant surgeon had been doing when she thought being right about saving a child gave her permission to ignore everyone else's rights. My name is Ryan Bennett. Claire and I had been married for 9 years. She was 41 and one of the most respected transplant surgeons in Minnesota. Chief of Abdominal Transplant Surgery at North River. Associate Professor. More than 600 kidney transplants. Dozens of published papers. The kind of doctor families requested by name after finding her interviews online at 3 in the morning. Claire was brilliant. Decisive. Almost impossible to intimidate. Those qualities made her extraordinary in an operating room. They were becoming unbearable at home. Her ex was Daniel Mercer. They had dated during medical school and remained close for years afterward. Too close, in my opinion. Claire called him family. Daniel called her whenever something went wrong. Divorce. Job loss. His mother's stroke. His son's illness. That son was Ethan Mercer. 16. Smart kid. Quiet. Obsessed with hockey. And completely innocent in every bad decision the adults around him were about to make. Ethan had congenital kidney disease. By 15, his kidney function was falling rapidly. By 16, his nephrologists were preparing for transplant. Daniel was willing to donate. He was also hypertensive and had enough cardiovascular risk that North River's donor team declined him. Ethan's mother was not medically eligible either. Several relatives tested. None worked. Then one night Claire came home and put a folder beside my dinner plate. Ethan needs a living donor. I looked at her. I know. His numbers are getting worse. How bad? Bad enough that dialysis may start before summer. I hated hearing that. Whatever I thought about Daniel, Ethan did not deserve any of it. Claire sat across from me. You're O positive. I stared. So is Ethan. That means almost nothing beyond blood type. She looked surprised. I had listened to 9 years of transplant conversations. I knew enough. I want you to get screened. There it was. Not donate. Screen. Much easier word. For Ethan? Yes. I put my fork down. Claire. It's a blood test. It starts with a blood test. Yes. And then if I match? We decide from there. I should have noticed that word. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking you to. Seriously. I understand. So I agreed. Because a 16-year-old kid was sick. Because I loved my wife. And because at that point, I still believed an evaluation was exactly what the hospital said it was. Information. Not commitment. North River handled living donors through a team separate from the recipient's medical staff. That separation existed for a reason. The donor was supposed to have independent physicians. An independent donor advocate. Private psychological assessment. The right to stop at any point. The right to refuse without the recipient being told why. Claire knew those rules better than I did. She taught them. My first appointment was with Dr. Priya Shah, a donor nephrologist I had never met. Claire was not allowed in the room. That bothered her. I could tell. It reassured me. Dr. Shah made the boundaries clear. Your wife's role at this hospital changes nothing about your rights here. Good. You can stop today. I know. You can stop after testing. Okay. You can stop the morning of surgery. I looked at her. Seriously? Yes. And Ethan's family doesn't get told why? Not unless you choose to disclose it. That surprised me. What do you tell them? That the donor is unable to proceed. So you protect people from being blamed. We protect voluntariness. That word stayed with me. Voluntariness. The workup took almost 3 weeks. Blood tests. Urine collection. CT imaging. Cardiac testing. Psychological interview. Family history. Every part designed to determine 2 things. Was I medically safe to donate? And was I doing it freely? Then the results came back. I was compatible. Very compatible. Claire found out before I told her. That should have been my first alarm. She walked into our kitchen smiling in a way I had not seen in months. You match. I stopped. How do you know? Her smile disappeared. Daniel called. Daniel knows already? The recipient team knows they have a compatible candidate. That isn't what I asked. She hesitated. He knows the workup looks promising. Who told him? I don't know. That answer felt wrong. But Ethan was sick, and the important part seemed bigger. I finished the evaluation. That was when the problem became real. My CT showed anatomy that technically allowed donation, but my left kidney had 2 renal arteries instead of 1. Not rare. Not automatically dangerous. But it made surgery somewhat more complex. Dr. Shah explained the numbers carefully. You are still medically acceptable. Would you do it? She smiled. I cannot make that decision for you. Pretend I'm your brother. I still wouldn't. Helpful. She leaned forward. Ryan, living kidney donation is generally very safe in carefully selected donors. But safe does not mean zero risk. I knew that. Bleeding. Infection. Clots. Anesthesia complications. Rare serious long-term outcomes. Most donors did well. That still did not make surgery nothing. Then she asked. If Claire were not a transplant surgeon, would you feel different about saying no? That question caught me. Why? You tell me. I thought about it. Then answered honestly. Yes. Why? Because she treats the medical risk like something already solved. Do you feel pressured? I hesitated. That was enough. Dr. Shah noticed. I'm not asking whether your wife threatened you. She hasn't. Pressure can be more subtle. I looked down. I don't know. She nodded. Then don't make a decision today. I went home. For 5 days, I thought about it. I read donor outcome studies. Talked privately with Dr. Shah. Talked to a donor advocate named Melissa Grant. I even spoke to 2 previous kidney donors. One would do it again without hesitation. The other told me she loved the recipient but wished someone had explained how difficult recovery could be. Neither answer made mine for me. Eventually, I decided. No. Not because Ethan did not matter. Not because I wanted him sick. Because I did not want elective surgery performed on a healthy organ in my body. That was enough. It had to be. I told the donor team first. Melissa looked directly at me. You're sure? Yes. Then we close your evaluation. What do you tell the recipient side? That you cannot proceed. Nothing else? Nothing else. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Then came the harder part. Claire. I told her at home that evening. She stared at me. What do you mean, no? I mean I'm not donating. You were cleared. I know. You're an excellent candidate. I know. Then what changed? Nothing changed. Her face hardened. Ryan, Ethan is 16. I know. He may start dialysis within months. I know. You could prevent that. Maybe. Not maybe. Transplants fail too. You know perfectly well living donor outcomes are excellent. That doesn't make me obligated. She stood. You have 2 kidneys. There it was. The sentence. Like she was counting spare parts. Yes. And you can live normally with 1. Usually. Oh, come on. Claire. You let them scare you. No. Was it Shah? What? Did Priya make the anatomy sound dangerous? She did her job. 2 arteries are manageable. I've operated on donors with more complicated anatomy. I stared at her. You are not my surgeon. I know what I'm talking about. That isn't what I said. She crossed her arms. What reason did you give them? That is private. Her expression changed. Private? Yes. I'm your wife. And this is my medical evaluation. You're hiding behind process. No. I'm using it. She laughed bitterly. Unbelievable. What? A child needs a kidney and you're making this about autonomy. I felt something inside me tighten. It is literally my kidney. And Ethan is running out of time. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't help him. No. You could. Yes. Then why won't you? I looked at her. Because I don't want to. Silence. That was apparently the one answer she could not accept. Her face went cold. That is unbelievably selfish. I stared at my wife. You're calling me selfish because I won't have an organ removed. I'm calling you selfish because you can save a child and you're choosing comfort. Comfort? You'll recover. You don't get to guarantee that. I know the statistics. You know patients. I know medicine. And I know my answer. She grabbed her keys. Where are you going? Hospital. It's 9:30. I have work. She left. The next morning, Daniel called me. I had not told Daniel anything. Ryan, can we talk? My stomach dropped. About what? You backing out. I went still. Who told you? Silence. Daniel. Claire said the donor team got in your head. There it was. Not just that I could not proceed. My private decision. My supposed reason. I hung up without answering. Then I called Melissa Grant. Did your team tell Claire why I withdrew? No. Immediate. Did anyone tell the recipient team? Only that you were unable to proceed. Daniel knows I chose not to. Silence. Then Melissa said, Ryan, I need you to come in. I drove to North River. She met me with the compliance officer. They pulled my electronic record access log. At 9:48 the previous night, after leaving our house, Claire used her hospital credentials to open my donor evaluation. Not one page accidentally. She opened the nephrology assessment, the surgical anatomy report, the psychosocial note, and the donor advocate note documenting. Candidate elects not to proceed. Decision appears voluntary and informed. Candidate requests reason remain confidential from recipient/family. Claire had no clinical role in my donor evaluation. None. She was specifically separated from it because she was my wife and because Ethan had a personal connection to her. The compliance officer asked, Did you authorize Dr. Bennett to access these records? No. Did you authorize her to share your reason for declining? No. He made another note. Then Melissa asked, Has she pressured you to reconsider? Yes. How? I told them. You have 2 kidneys. You can live normally with one. Selfish. A child needs you. Melissa's face changed. Not dramatically. Professionally. That was worse. Anything else? She told Daniel my donor team got in my head. Did you authorize that communication? No. The compliance officer closed his notebook. We are opening a privacy and transplant program review. I looked at him. I don't want her fired. He answered immediately. That is not what your report decides. There it was. The same truth people always hate when consequences begin. A report does not sentence anyone. It creates review. At 11:12, I signed the compliance statement. 1 page describing unauthorized access, disclosure, and coercive pressure surrounding a living donor decision. At 11:17, the hospital's privacy system confirmed Claire's access history. At 11:21, the chief medical officer was notified. At 11:26, Claire was paged out of the operating suite before her next scheduled case began. At 11:31, she was temporarily removed from all living donor evaluations and transplant selection meetings pending review. Not fired. Not stripped of her license. Not marched out by security. But for the first time in her career, somebody had put a boundary in front of Claire Bennett that expertise could not override. She called me at 11:38. What did you do? I looked at the compliance report still sitting on the desk. I reported the access. You reported your own wife? I reported a doctor opening my confidential donor file without permission. I was trying to understand. You read the note where I specifically asked that my reasons stay confidential. Silence. Then. Daniel was panicking. So you told him. He deserved to know why his son lost a donor. No. My voice was calmer than I felt. He deserved to know I couldn't proceed. He deserved the truth. It wasn't yours to give. Claire stopped. Then she said the sentence that ended something in me. If you weren't being selfish, you wouldn't be ashamed of the reason. I closed my eyes. I'm not ashamed. Then why hide it? Because saying no to surgery is not a confession. She had no answer. I continued. You're a transplant surgeon, Claire. I know. You teach doctors that donation has to be voluntary. I know. You teach that donors can withdraw. I know. You teach that their reason stays protected. Her voice broke. I know. And the first time those rules stopped you from getting what you wanted, you treated them like obstacles. Silence. Then I heard someone knock on her office door. A man's voice. The chief medical officer. Claire whispered. They want my badge access. I said nothing. Ryan? Yes? Is this because I called you selfish? No. Then what is it? Because you stopped acting like my wife and started acting like my body belonged to your transplant program. The line went silent. Then the chief medical officer spoke again in the background. Claire had to go. Before she hung up, she said, "This could ruin my career." I looked at the report. "No." She stopped. "If your career ends, it will be because people review what you did." I paused. The report only made sure they looked. Claire's hospital access was restricted before noon. Not completely. North River did not suspend her from every clinical duty based on one complaint. She could still round on postoperative patients. Still consult on transplant complications. Still perform emergency surgery if another attending physician supervised the case. But she was removed from anything involving living donors. No donor evaluations. No donor selection meetings. No access to donor records unless specifically authorized. No contact with me through hospital channels. And no involvement in Ethan Mercer's transplant planning. That last restriction was the one she hated most. I knew because Daniel called me at 12:16. Again. This time I answered. "What?" His voice was already angry. "What did you report?" "You should ask Claire. She got pulled from Ethan's case. She was never supposed to be directly managing my donor evaluation." "That's not what I asked." "Then ask a question you're entitled to have answered." He went quiet. Then. "My son is sick." "I know." He trusted Claire. "I know. You were the best donor they had." "That does not make me his donor." His breathing became sharp. "You know how many people would give anything to have your match. That doesn't change my decision. He may end up on dialysis because of this." "No. He may end up on dialysis because he has kidney failure." Silence. Harsh. True. I hated saying it. But I was done accepting language that turned Ethan's disease into something I had caused by keeping both of my kidneys. Daniel said, "You sound cold." "I'm trying to be precise." "You're hiding behind words." "No. I'm separating responsibility." "You could save him. I could take on surgery and medical risk for him." "Same thing." "No. That difference was everything." Daniel lowered his voice. "Claire said you were medically cleared." I closed my eyes. There was the second privacy breach. Not just my decision. My medical suitability. "Did she tell you about my anatomy?" He hesitated. "That was enough." "What did she say?" "Ryan." "What did she say?" "That your surgery would be straightforward. It would not necessarily have been difficult." But Claire had no right to summarize my CT for Daniel. "Did she tell you I had 2 renal arteries?" Silence. "Daniel." "Yes. I wrote it down." "What else?" "She said donor nephrology was being overly cautious." I felt something settle in me. Not anger. Evidence. "What exactly?" "That they kept emphasizing rare complications even though the actual risk was low." "Anything about my psychological assessment?" "No." "Donor advocate?" "No." "Did she tell Ethan why I said no?" "No." That mattered. At least the 16-year-old had not been dragged into it directly. I said, "Do not call me again about donating. Ryan. I mean it. He's a kid." "I know. You were his chance." "No." I cut him off. "I was one possible living donor." He stopped. "There are deceased donor options. Paired exchange possibilities if another incompatible donor appears. Other relatives can still be assessed. His transplant team knows that better than either of us." Claire said living donor is better. "It often is." So better does not mean owed." Then I ended the call. At 12:38, I sent a factual summary of the conversation to North River Compliance. No interpretation. Just what Daniel said Claire had told him. At 1:05, the hospital requested a full audit of Claire's access to my record. That widened the problem. The first report showed she had opened my donor file the previous night. The deeper audit showed that was not the first time. She had accessed it 4 times over the previous 2 weeks. The first access occurred the day my compatibility testing was finalized. Before I knew. The second came after my CT. The third after my donor nephrology appointment. The fourth was the night I declined. Every access happened under her personal physician credentials. None had a documented clinical reason. The compliance officer, Martin Keene, called me back into his office. He had another person with him. Dr. Helen Park, North River's transplant medical director. I had met her once at a hospital fundraiser. She looked different now. No cocktail dress. No polite donor event smile. Just a physician looking at a compliance file involving one of her most prominent surgeons. She started carefully. Ryan, I want to make one thing clear. Okay. Your decision not to donate will not affect Ethan's eligibility for care here. Good. His case is being transferred to another transplant surgeon. Who? I can't discuss his medical care beyond what you're authorized to know. Fair. She continued. We are also assigning another recipient coordinator because Dr. Bennett had an unusual personal connection to the family. Should that have happened earlier? Yes. Immediate. That surprised me. She disclosed Daniel as an old friend, Park said. She did not disclose the full extent of the prior romantic relationship. I looked at her. She told the hospital they were friends? Yes. Not exes? Correct. That was new. When? During the initial conflict screening. Did anyone ask directly? Yes. Martin slid a form across the desk. Not Ethan's medical information. Claire's conflict disclosure. One line. Nature of relationship to recipient family, long-standing personal family friend. Then, any prior romantic/financial relationship creating potential conflict? No. I stared at the word. No. She lied? Martin answered carefully. We are determining whether the response was inaccurate, incomplete, or based on her interpretation of what constituted a current conflict. That was compliance language for. We know it looks bad. We are not writing the conclusion before interviewing her. Good. I asked. Does her being Daniel's ex automatically disqualify her from Ethan's case? No, Dr. Park said. But it would normally trigger a formal conflict review and likely recusal from certain decisions. What kind? Anything where personal advocacy could affect donor evaluation, allocation discussions, or decisions requiring independence. Like my donation. Yes. There it was. Claire had not merely pressured me at home. She had placed herself inside a system designed to protect donors from exactly that kind of pressure. Dr. Park continued. We also need to understand whether she communicated with donor team staff about your candidacy. My stomach tightened. Did she? We are reviewing messages. That meant yes or maybe. Neither was good. At 2:20, Melissa Grant called me. The donor advocate. Can you come back tomorrow? Why? I need to document something I should have documented sooner. What? She paused. Claire contacted me before your final decision. I sat down. When? The afternoon after your CT. What did she say? She asked whether I thought you were hesitant. I stared at the wall. And you answered? I told her donor discussions were confidential. Then? She said she wasn't asking for specifics. What was she asking? Whether I thought you understood how manageable the risk was. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like Claire. Not overtly demanding information. Pressing the edges. What did you say? That my role was to support your independent decision. And? She said, he gets anxious when doctors overemphasize rare complications. I almost laughed. Of course she did. Trying to influence how the advocate interpreted my hesitation. Melissa continued. I told her not to contact me again about your evaluation. Did you document that? No. Why? A pause. Because she's Dr. Bennett. That answer hurt more than if she had lied. Not because Melissa was weak. Because institutional prestige works quietly. Claire was chief of transplant surgery. Melissa was an advocate inside the same program. Telling Claire no was easy. Writing in the record that the chief surgeon had tried to discuss her husband's confidential donor evaluation? Different level of conflict. I should have entered a note, Melissa said. Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me now. I told compliance before calling you. Good. Then she added. There was another conversation. Of course. When? The day before you withdrew. What did she say? She asked whether a donor could be considered psychologically unsuitable if fear seemed disproportionate to actual medical risk. I stood. She asked that about me? She did not use your name. She didn't need to. No. What did you say? That donor autonomy is not a pathology. That line stayed with me. Exactly. No was not a diagnosis. Fear was not a defect to be medically corrected until consent appeared. Melissa said. I think she was trying to find a way to understand why you weren't moving forward. She was trying to turn my hesitation into a problem for professionals to solve. That is how it felt. Did she ask you to disqualify me? No. Push me? No. Change your recommendation? No. Again, limits. Claire had not ordered staff to coerce me. She had tested boundaries. Repeatedly. That distinction mattered. By the next morning, North River's independent review expanded beyond privacy. The hospital activated its transplant program quality committee. Not because one surgeon's marriage was messy. Because living donor programs are built around one principle that cannot be optional. The donor must be free to say no. If the chief transplant surgeon had interfered with that principle, even informally, the program had to know how far it went. At 9:10, Martin Keene interviewed me again. This time, he asked about our marriage. Not everything. Only statements related to donation. Did Dr. Bennett ever threaten divorce if you refused? No. Financial consequences? No. Employment consequences? No. Did she control your access to medical care? No. Did she repeatedly ask you to reconsider? Yes. How many times? At least 6. After you clearly said no? 4. What did those conversations involve? Ethan's age. Dialysis. My health. The fact I have 2 kidneys. The idea that I was choosing comfort. Did she ever say refusal proved something about your character? Yes. What? Selfish. Anything else? I thought. Cowardly once. Martin looked up. When? The morning after I declined. Exact wording? She said, I never thought you were this cowardly about medical risk. He wrote it down. I hated seeing our marriage reduced to a compliance note. But then I remembered why the note existed. Because she had made my medical choice part of her professional campaign. At 11:40, Claire was interviewed. I was not there. I learned the broad outline later because the hospital provided me findings affecting my privacy complaint. She admitted every record access. She did not claim accident. That was important. Why did she open my file? She wanted to understand whether my decision was medically rational. That answer made the review team visibly uncomfortable, according to Martin. Not because patients need rational reasons. Because doctors do not get to decide whether a competent adult's refusal deserves to survive based on whether the doctor agrees with it. Claire admitted telling Daniel I remained medically suitable but had chosen not to proceed. She admitted discussing the dual renal arteries. She admitted characterizing donor counseling as overly cautious. She denied intending to pressure me clinically. I believed that. Then investigators asked about the conflict disclosure. Why had she marked no prior romantic relationship? Her answer. Because Daniel had been an ex from almost 20 years earlier, and she did not consider it relevant to her current medical judgment. That was not a lie in the dramatic sense. It was worse in the professional sense. Claire had decided for herself that a required disclosure was unnecessary because she trusted her own objectivity. The same mistake again. By 3 o'clock, North River imposed stronger restrictions. Claire was placed on administrative leave from the transplant service. She could continue limited non-transplant surgical duties pending credentialing review. Her chief title was temporarily suspended. Her access to transplant records was removed. The medical staff office opened a formal professional conduct investigation. The hospital notified its privacy office to determine whether the disclosure of my protected health information required external reporting. And the transplant program began reviewing a sample of Claire's previous living donor cases. That was the moment her career truly became vulnerable. Not because they assumed she had coerced other donors. Because once one boundary failure was substantiated, the hospital had to ask whether it was isolated. Claire called me at 5:14. I almost did not answer. Then I did. They removed me as chief. Temporarily. For now. Yes. She sounded exhausted. They're reviewing old donor cases. That seems appropriate. You think I pressured other donors? I have no idea. You know me. I thought I did. That hurt her. Then. I never forced anyone. I didn't say you did. I never threatened a donor. I know. I never operated without consent. I know. Her voice rose. Then why are they treating me like I'm dangerous? Because coercion doesn't start at the operating table. Silence. I continued. You accessed a donor record you were not allowed to see. Yes. You disclosed his medical details. Yes. You contacted his advocate. Yes. You tried to decide whether his fear was medically reasonable. Her voice cracked. Yes. And the donor happened to be your husband. She started crying. I thought if I could understand why you were afraid, I could fix it. There it was. Fix it. Not hear it. Not respect it. Fix it. My answer was no. I know. You treated no like a symptom. She said nothing. Then. I was trying to save Ethan. I know. That has to matter. It explains why. Doesn't it excuse anything? No. She cried harder. Then the question I had been waiting for came. What happens to us? I looked at my wedding ring. 9 years. A sick child. A desperate father. A brilliant doctor who had spent so long being the person who solved impossible medical problems that she forgot some human boundaries were not medical problems at all. I don't know. Her breath shook. Ryan. I mean it. I need you. That is exactly why I need space. She went silent. Then. I'm sorry. I believed her. That did not fix anything. The next morning, North River called me with the first result from the historic case review. They had found another living donor. Not someone Claire had forced to donate. Someone who had withdrawn. 3 years earlier. The donor had privately told the advocate she no longer wanted surgery. Her reason was supposed to remain confidential. Claire later documented in the recipient chart that the donor had developed anxiety regarding operative risk and elected not to proceed. That sounded harmless. Until the hospital compared systems. Claire had never been authorized to see the donor's psychological note. Yet somehow, she knew anxiety was the reason. One case. Then another. Different recipient. Different donor. Same problem. The review was no longer asking whether Claire broke the rules because I was her husband. It was asking whether she had been treating donor confidentiality as optional whenever she believed knowing more might help save the recipient. And if that pattern was real, my report had not created the danger to her career. It had only exposed the first thread. The hospital was starting to pull. The historic review found 6 questionable donor cases in 11 years. Not 6 forced donations. Not 6 illegal surgeries. That distinction mattered. 3 donors completed donation. 3 withdrew. All 6 had one thing in common. Claire had obtained information from the donor side that she should not have had. Sometimes through direct record access. Sometimes through informal conversations. Sometimes through recipient coordinators who trusted her enough to answer questions they should have refused. The hospital classified the cases into levels. 2 were documentation problems. 2 were privacy concerns. 2 involved potential interference with donor independence. Mine was the most serious. Because I was her husband. Because she knew I had explicitly requested confidentiality. And because she disclosed my reason after I said no. But mine was no longer isolated. That changed everything. Dr. Helen Park called me on Friday afternoon. We've completed the first retrospective sample. How bad? I can only discuss findings that relate to the issues raised by your complaint. Understood. She paused. We found evidence that Dr. Bennett had developed a pattern of crossing the separation between recipient and donor teams. How long? Several years. Did anyone report her? Not formally. That answer bothered me. Why not? We're trying to understand that. I already had a guess. Because she was Claire Bennett, chief of transplant surgery. The surgeon people called when someone else said a case was impossible. Prestige is not the same as authority. But hospitals sometimes confuse them. I asked. Did anyone tell her to stop? Yes. That was worse. How many times? More than once. I closed my eyes. What happened? One donor coordinator documented a verbal reminder 5 years ago. For what? Dr. Bennett asked why a potential donor had withdrawn. That's not supposed to be disclosed. Correct. What did the coordinator tell her? That the donor was unable to proceed and the reason was confidential. And Claire? She argued that understanding donor barriers could help the recipient identify another candidate. Of course she did. Always a medical reason. Always a way helping the patient could justify getting closer to the boundary. Did the coordinator tell her more? No. Then what's the problem? Dr. Bennett later opened a multidisciplinary note containing language about donor anxiety. My stomach tightened. Authorized? No documented clinical need. Again. Not necessarily malicious. Still unauthorized. Another case involved a donor who wanted to withdraw because of family pressure. The donor advocate recorded that privately. Claire apparently learned the concern and contacted the recipient's social worker. Not the donor. That distinction mattered. She said the family needed better education about donor safety. Maybe true. But if the donor wanted out because the family was pressuring him, educating the family about how safe donation was could increase the same pressure he was trying to escape. Dr. Park said. The review team is concerned she repeatedly treated donor hesitation as a barrier to transplantation rather than an independent outcome. That sentence described Claire perfectly. In her world, problems existed to be solved. Cancer. Organ failure. Rejection. Bleeding. Waiting lists. She was trained to push past obstacles. The donor's no was the one obstacle the system required her not to push. She never learned to leave it alone. That evening, I met Melissa Grant at a coffee shop across from the hospital. Her request. Not official. She looked exhausted. I'm considering resigning. Because of this? Partly. Why? I should have reported her earlier. Did you know about the other cases? Not all. Mine? Yes. You did tell her to stop. I didn't document enough. That's not the same as causing what she did. She stared into her coffee. That sounds like something you've been telling yourself too. Fair. I leaned back. What happened before me? Melissa hesitated. There was one donor I remember clearly. Can you tell me? Not identifying details. Fine. A woman was considering donating to her brother. Okay. She withdrew after her husband threatened divorce if she went through with surgery. That sounds like pressure. It was. What did the program do? Protected her withdrawal. Told the recipient side she could not proceed. As they should. Melissa nodded. Claire asked me whether the donor had become medically unsuitable or voluntarily withdrawn. What did you say? That I couldn't discuss it. And? She said the distinction mattered because the recipient had another sibling who might be encouraged to test. I already knew where this was going. She wanted to know whether the family was losing donors for medical reasons or emotional ones. Yes. Did you tell her? No. Good. She found out anyway. How? I don't know. Later review found she had opened a social work note. Not the protected donor advocate note. Still a note outside her recipient care need. Then she told the recipient family during a conference. Sometimes healthy donors become frightened after talking to spouses. It may help to keep the conversation focused on actual medical risk. She did not name the withdrawn donor. She did not reveal the divorce threat explicitly. But the family knew who had just withdrawn. The donor later complained that relatives started calling her cowardly. No formal privacy complaint was filed. No one connected it back to Claire at the time. Melissa said. She thought she was helping the brother. She probably was. That's what makes it hard. No. Melissa looked at me. That's what makes it understandable. I paused. Not hard. She nodded slowly. Right. Understanding motive does not make the rule unclear. A donor's confidential withdrawal existed specifically because family pressure could become overwhelming. Claire had treated confidentiality as less important than keeping transplantation moving. Again. The hospital interviewed her a second time Monday morning. This time, she had counsel. That was appropriate. She was not being interrogated as my wife anymore. She was defending her professional record. The interview lasted 4 hours. I knew only what she later told me voluntarily. She admitted accessing several donor side notes over the years. Her explanation was consistent. She believed transplant physicians needed enough context to counsel recipient families effectively. She said information silos sometimes harmed patient care. She pointed out that transplant programs require coordination across multiple specialties. All true. Then the review attorney asked, "Did you believe the donor team's confidentiality rules were too restrictive?" Claire answered yes. There it was. Not misunderstanding. Philosophy. She believed the system was designed incorrectly. The attorney apparently asked, "If so, did you seek formal policy changes?" No. Did you bring concerns to the transplant committee? Not formally. Did you request ethics review? No. Then what did you do? Claire had no good answer. She simply worked around rules she disagreed with. That was much harder to defend. The hospital could tolerate disagreement. Doctors argue about policy constantly. What it could not tolerate was a department chief privately substituting her judgment for the rules while continuing to tell everyone the program followed them. The Professional Conduct Committee met Wednesday. Claire remained on leave from transplant service. Then the medical staff office issued a preliminary finding. Her privacy violations were substantiated. Her failure to disclose the prior romantic relationship with Daniel was substantiated as materially incomplete. Her attempts to obtain information from donor advocates were substantiated. Her coercion of me was classified more carefully. The committee did not conclude she medically forced me to donate. Obviously, I never donated. It did conclude her repeated pressure after my refusal was inconsistent with living donor voluntariness standards, especially because of her dual role as spouse and transplant chief. Then came the older cases. The committee found a recurring pattern of inappropriate donor information access and boundary crossing. No evidence of physical coercion. No evidence she falsified consent. No evidence she forced surgery on anyone. That mattered. The truth did not need exaggeration. But the pattern was serious enough that North River reported the findings to its medical executive committee and transplant oversight body. Claire's chief title was removed permanently. Not pending. Removed. She remained employed for the moment. Her surgical privileges outside living donor transplantation were under separate review. Her faculty appointment remained intact. Her medical license remained active. Still, the career she had built was cracking. She called me that night. Not crying. That worried me more. They removed me as chief. I heard. Permanent. Yes. I built that program. I know. 11 years. I know. I increased living donor volume by 40%. I know. We cut wait times. I know. We had some of the best outcomes in the region. I know. Her voice sharpened. Then why does none of that matter? It matters. Doesn't feel like it. Because you're asking it to cancel something else. Silence. That's not how records work, Claire. She breathed in. So 11 years of good outcomes don't outweigh 6 privacy cases? I don't know. You have an opinion. I have no idea what should happen to your surgical privileges. But you think I deserve to lose chief? I thought about that. Yes. She stopped breathing for a second. Why? Because chiefs are supposed to enforce the rules you kept deciding didn't apply when they slowed you down. That hit. She did not answer. Then. I saved people. Yes. I did. I know. You make it sound like that means nothing. No. I softened my voice. It means exactly what it means. You saved people. That doesn't give you ownership over donors. She started crying. Quietly. I never thought I owned anyone. You thought your medical judgment gave you more claim on their reasons than the policy did. Yes. That is close enough. She cried harder. Then. Do you think I'm a bad doctor? No. That surprised her. No. I think you're an excellent surgeon. Then how can this happen? Because technical skill doesn't make every judgment good. Silence. I continued. You were so used to being the person who knew the medically best outcome that you stopped respecting decisions that made the medical outcome worse. I was trying to keep people alive. I know. Ethan may still end up on dialysis. Yes. Her voice broke. How do you live with that? That question changed something in me. By remembering his kidney disease is not my moral debt. She went silent. Then whispered. That sounds cruel. It felt cruel the first 100 times I had to say it to myself. I looked at my hands. But if the only way your ethics work is by making every healthy compatible person responsible for another person's illness, then donation stops being donation. No answer. I continued. It becomes obligation. Claire cried for a long time. Then. I understand that now. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I did. But understanding after consequences is different from understanding before you hurt someone. She asked. Will you come home tonight? No. I had been staying at a furnished apartment for almost 2 weeks. Ryan. I need space. Are you leaving me? I don't know yet. Another silence. Then. Is there someone else? I almost laughed. No. Daniel? What? You think I want Daniel? I think you've made Ethan and Daniel part of our marriage for years. That's not the same. No. But it matters. She knew. Then she said. I'm going to tell Daniel we can't have personal contact anymore. That's your choice. I want you to know. I know now. That was all. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I nearly closed the door. He held up both hands. I'm not here about your kidney. Then why? Claire ended contact. I stared at him. That is between you and Claire. She said it was because she blurred professional and personal boundaries. That sounds accurate. His jaw tightened. She was the only reason Ethan got moved through North River as quickly as he did. That caught my attention. What does that mean? Daniel hesitated. Then. She pushed. How? I don't know. Then don't say things you can't explain. He looked frustrated. She got him appointments faster. Emergency need? Sometimes. Other times? Silence. My stomach dropped. Daniel. She knew who to call. That was not automatically improper. Doctors expedite urgent cases all the time. But after everything else, the sentence mattered. What else did she do? He looked at me. I thought you knew. Knew what? When Ethan's transplant referral first went in, North River said the evaluation queue was almost 7 weeks. I waited. Claire got him in within 9 days. That could be legitimate. High-risk progression. Clinical urgency. Then Daniel added. She told me not to worry. She said she could move things around. I felt cold. Move what? I don't know. Did someone else get delayed? I don't know. Did she use her chief role? I assumed. I closed my eyes. Another thread. Maybe harmless. Maybe not. I asked. Why are you telling me? Daniel looked exhausted. Because the hospital called me yesterday. For Ethan? For questions about how Claire got involved. There it was. The review was expanding again. Not because my report accused Claire of favoring Ethan. It hadn't. Because once the hospital discovered an undisclosed personal relationship with the recipient family, every exceptional decision involving that family had to be examined. Daniel said. They asked whether she ever promised Ethan priority. Did she? No. Special access? He looked away. Daniel. She said she would make sure he didn't get lost in the system. That sentence could mean good advocacy. Or favoritism. The evidence would decide. I stepped back from the doorway. Whatever they ask, tell the truth. He looked at me. You really want her destroyed? No. Then why do you sound like that? Because I'm done deciding outcomes before facts. He stared at me. Then nodded. For once, he understood. The next afternoon, North River's compliance office pulled Ethan's referral timeline. 7 evaluation appointments had been moved. 3 tests expedited. 1 committee review placed on an earlier agenda. Most had documented medical reasons. 2 did not. Both had been changed after direct messages from Claire. One of those messages read, "Please move Ethan Mercer into next week's slot. I know the family personally and do not want him sitting in queue while his renal function declines. I'll take responsibility." The problem was not that Ethan was undeserving. His kidney function really was worsening. The problem was the sentence in the middle. I know the family personally. Claire had denied a relevant prior relationship on her conflict form. Then invoked that same personal relationship to accelerate care. For the first time, the investigation was no longer only about how she treated donors. It was about whether she had used her position to favor the recipient whose need had driven everything. And if that was substantiated, Claire's career was no longer standing on one privacy violation. It was standing on a pattern that reached both sides of the transplant system. North River's review of Ethan Mercer's referral did not begin by asking whether he deserved faster care. He did. His kidney function was deteriorating. His nephrologist documented progressive decline. He had increasing fatigue, worsening anemia, and laboratory trends that made preemptive transplant planning medically reasonable. No one disputed that. The question was simpler. Had Claire used a personal relationship to move him ahead of other patients without following the hospital's prioritization process? That was harder. Because medicine is full of judgment. Schedules change. Urgent cases move. Cancellations open slots. Doctors call each other. A patient can go from 6 weeks out to next Tuesday for perfectly legitimate reasons. So the compliance office rebuilt the timeline. Every appointment. Every cancellation. Every message. Every person displaced. The first 4 changes were clean. A nephrology consult moved forward because another patient cancelled. Documented. An imaging study moved because Ethan's creatinine worsened. Documented. A cardiac test was expedited because the transplant committee needed it before listing review. Documented. Then came the 5th change. A donor-recipient education appointment had been scheduled for another family. Claire asked the coordinator to move Ethan into that slot. The original family was pushed back 9 days. No medical urgency comparison had been documented. The coordinator wrote, Dr. Bennett requests Mercer family next week due to personal concern about disease progression. Personal concern. Not clinical criteria. Then Claire replied, correct. I know the family and want this moving. The original family eventually completed evaluation. No one died. No one lost a kidney. No catastrophic consequence followed. That made the decision easier to minimize. Until investigators found a second one. A transplant committee agenda had been full. Claire added Ethan as an extra case. That alone was not improper. Chiefs added urgent patients routinely. But another candidate with similar kidney function had been deferred to the following week because the meeting lacked time. The transplant coordinator had asked, why Mercer over Patterson? Both appear preemptive and neither is on dialysis. Claire replied, Mercer is known to me and I have more confidence we can move him efficiently. Patterson can wait 1 cycle. That email became the center of the review. Not because Ethan was unworthy. Because known to me was not a clinical criterion. Dr. Helen Park called me after the finding was confirmed. I had stopped asking for updates unless they directly touched my complaint. This one did. Because Claire's conflict disclosure had become part of the same pattern. Ryan, I need to let you know the review has moved into medical staff governance. What does that mean? The hospital is examining whether Dr. Bennett used her leadership role to create preferential access for a personally connected recipient. Was Ethan actually harmed by waiting? He didn't wait. You know what I mean. Yes. Was the other patient harmed? We cannot discuss another patient's protected information. Fair. I rubbed my forehead. Is this enough to end Claire's employment? I don't know. License? I don't know. Privileges? That is under review. I hated that answer. Not because it was vague. Because it was honest. There was no satisfying switch where a hospital discovered misconduct and instantly erased a doctor's career. There were levels. Department leadership. Hospital employment. Clinical privileges. Academic appointment. Board certification. State licensure. Transplant program participation. Each had its own process. Each required evidence. Claire had spent 20 years building a career across all of them. If it fell, it would not fall in one piece. The medical executive committee interviewed her on Thursday. She had an attorney present. So did the hospital. The first question was whether she believed Ethan deserved faster evaluation than the patient displaced from the education appointment. Claire answered. Medically, I believed his progression justified speed. Did you document that comparison? No. Did you know the other patient's clinical condition? Not in detail. Then how did you determine Ethan should take the slot? Claire reportedly paused. Then said, I knew Ethan. There it was. Not malice. Not bribery. Familiarity. The oldest form of bias in the world. The committee chair asked. Was that appropriate? No. Another question. Why did you not recuse? Claire answered. Because I believed my knowledge of his medical history made me useful. That sentence was technically plausible. She did know his history. But then came the follow-up. Did you also know his father had been your romantic partner? Yes. Did the conflict form ask about prior romantic relationships? Yes. Why did you answer no? Claire looked down. Because I thought a relationship from medical school had no bearing on my judgment 20 years later. The chair asked. Did you think the hospital should decide that? Silence. Then. Yes. That was the problem again. Claire kept appointing herself final judge of whether safeguards applied to Claire. The hospital moved next to my donor evaluation. She admitted accessing my file. Again. She admitted telling Daniel that I remained medically eligible. Again. She admitted discussing my renal anatomy. Again. Then an attorney asked. Why did you believe Mr. Bennett's medical suitability was information Mr. Mercer needed? Claire answered. Because Daniel believed his son had lost a donor for medical reasons. And? I wanted him to understand that was not what happened. Why? Because he was devastated. The attorney waited. Claire continued. I thought uncertainty was making it worse. Whose uncertainty? Daniel's. And whose privacy did you use to relieve it? That question apparently stopped the room. Claire did not answer for several seconds. Then. Ryan's. No excuse. No medicine. Just the truth. The review ended after 4 hours. That night, Claire came to my apartment. She did not ask first. I almost refused to let her in. Then saw her standing in the hallway with no coat despite freezing rain outside. Old instinct kicked in. I opened the door. You can't keep showing up like this. I know. Then why are you here? Because I think they're going to remove my transplant privileges. I said nothing. She stepped inside. Her face looked gray. Not dramatic. Exhausted. They asked whether I understood the difference between advocacy and favoritism. What did you say? That I do now. Did you then? She looked at me. I thought I did. That answer was becoming the story of her career. She sat on the edge of my couch. I never thought Ethan should get a kidney before someone sicker. I know. I never manipulated the wait list. I know. I never changed allocation scores. I know. I moved appointments. Yes. I added him to an agenda. Yes. I thought I was helping. I know. She pressed both hands to her face. That sounds pathetic now. No. She looked up. It sounds understandable. Her eyes filled. Not excusable. No. She nodded. Then said. I called Patterson. I frowned. Who? The patient whose committee review was delayed. My body went cold. You contacted another patient involved in your investigation? Not directly. Claire. Through compliance. I asked whether I could apologize. And? They said absolutely not. Good. She laughed weakly. I know. You still don't understand boundaries. I'm trying. You thought apology gave you the right to enter someone else's case. Her face collapsed. Yes. I softened slightly. That instinct is the same one getting you in trouble. I know. You keep wanting to repair discomfort by doing something. Yes. Sometimes the correct action is leaving the other person alone. She looked at me. Like you. That was not where I expected the conversation to go. Yes. She nodded. I know. Then she said. I signed separation papers. I stared at her. What? My attorney sent them to yours. I had not filed yet. I had spoken with a lawyer. Apparently Claire had moved first. Why? Because I keep asking you to decide whether our marriage survives while you're still dealing with what I did. That was unusually self-aware. So you're leaving me? No. She looked down. I'm stopping myself from demanding an answer. There was a difference. I'm not asking you to sign tonight. Good. I just wanted you to know I won't use the marriage to pressure you into staying while the hospital review is happening. For the first time since this started, Claire was creating distance instead of closing it. It should have felt good. It felt sad. Then I asked. What about Daniel? I haven't spoken to him personally since the no-contact decision. Ethan? No direct contact. Do you know how he's doing? Only through what I'm allowed to know as a physician no longer on his case. That answer mattered. She was finally accepting information boundaries even when they hurt. Then her phone rang. Hospital counsel. She looked at me. I have to take this. Go ahead. She answered. Mostly listened. Her face changed slowly. What does that mean? Silence. Effective immediately? Another pause. I understand. She ended the call. I waited. Claire stared at the phone. They suspended my transplant surgery privileges. I said nothing. Not all surgery. Okay. I can still perform general and hepatobiliary cases under existing privileges. Okay. But no kidney transplant. Living or deceased donor? Any transplant. Her voice broke. Pending final medical executive committee action. That was the first time the consequence reached her hands. Not title. Not meetings. Surgery. The thing Claire was best at. The thing she believed defined her. She started crying. I've done this for 18 years. I know. I don't know who I am if I'm not a transplant surgeon. I looked at her. That may be something you need to figure out. She flinched. Then nodded. No argument. The hospital's preliminary decision became official the next morning. Claire's transplant privileges were suspended indefinitely pending remediation review and external reporting obligations. Her chief role remained terminated. Her employment contract went to review. The university placed her associate professor appointment on administrative status for clinical governance concerns. North River notified the state medical board of the privacy and professional boundary findings as required by its counsel. Not a license revocation. A report. The board would decide what, if anything, happened to her license. Then North River announced an external review of the entire living donor program. That scared Claire more than anything else. Not because she feared more hidden misconduct. Because she feared she had damaged the program itself. The external team reviewed donor protections, access controls, confidentiality practices, conflict disclosures, and staff escalation culture. 3 weeks later, the first finding came back. Claire had not acted alone in a vacuum. Several staff members had become accustomed to giving her information because she was the chief surgeon. Coordinators had sometimes answered questions they should have redirected. Managers had failed to escalate repeated boundary concerns. The donor record system allowed broader access than necessary. The program's culture had depended too much on knowing who was trusted. Claire was responsible for her choices. North River was responsible for building a system that made those choices too easy. That mattered. Because accountability was expanding in both directions. Then came the finding that changed her case again. The external reviewers identified an email from 6 years earlier. A compliance officer had warned Claire directly after a donor confidentiality complaint. Please remember that recipient physicians should not seek donor withdrawal reasons unless the donor authorizes disclosure. Future access without a documented clinical need may result in restriction of privileges. Claire replied. Understood. 6 years later, she opened my file anyway. That single word destroyed her strongest remaining defense. She could no longer claim she had misunderstood the rule. She had been warned. She had acknowledged it. And when my answer threatened an outcome she desperately wanted, she crossed the same boundary again. The final medical executive committee hearing was scheduled for Monday. This time, nobody was asking whether Claire had made one terrible decision because a 16-year-old boy was sick. They were asking why a surgeon who had already been formally warned had continued deciding that donor privacy mattered less whenever she believed the recipient needed her more. And that was a much harder career to save. Claire's final medical executive committee hearing began at 8 Monday morning. By noon, nobody was debating whether she had broken donor privacy rules. She had. The harder question was what North River could safely allow her to do next. Her attorney argued first. Claire was not incompetent. Her surgical outcomes were excellent. Her mortality rates were low. Her complication rates compared favorably with national benchmarks. She had never operated without consent. Never altered an allocation score. Never accepted money from a patient. Never falsified donor signatures. Never intentionally harmed anyone. All true. Then hospital counsel responded with a sentence Claire later repeated to me. Technical excellence is not a substitute for trustworthy judgment. That was the case. Not whether Claire could remove a kidney. Whether the hospital could trust her to respect the person attached to it. The committee reviewed the 6 historical cases again. 2 were relatively minor. Improper access to notes outside her role. No evidence the information changed a donor decision. 2 were worse. Confidential withdrawal reasons had reached recipient-side discussions in ways they should not have. Then came the 2 cases the committee considered most serious. The donor whose family began pressuring her after Claire indirectly discussed fear around surgery. And me. Her husband. A compatible donor who had clearly said no. A donor who had specifically requested confidentiality. A donor whose file Claire opened anyway. Then shared with the recipient's father. The committee chair, Dr. Samuel Ortega, asked Claire. Why did the prior warning 6 years ago not stop you? Claire sat beside her lawyer. She did not answer immediately. Finally. Because I convinced myself this situation was different. How? The donor was my husband. That should have made you more cautious. Yes. Instead, it made me feel entitled to understand. That was one of the cleanest admissions she had made. Ortega continued. Did you believe being married to Ryan reduced his privacy rights? No. Did your conduct reflect that? Claire closed her eyes. Yes. Then. I behaved as though marriage gave me access the hospital had intentionally denied me. No one needed to improve that answer. Another physician asked. Why did you tell Daniel Mercer that Ryan remained medically suitable? Claire answered. Because he believed Ryan had been excluded medically. And why was that your problem to solve? It wasn't. Did you understand that at the time? No. What did you understand? That Daniel was terrified and Ethan was getting sicker. That explains urgency. Yes. It does not explain why Ryan's private information became yours to spend. Claire's voice broke. I know. The committee moved to coercion. Claire's lawyer objected to that word. Reasonably. My client did not threaten Mr. Bennett's employment, finances, access to medical care, or physical safety. Correct. She did not force him to undergo testing. Correct. She did not schedule surgery after he withdrew. Correct. She did not falsify consent. Correct. Hospital counsel agreed with all of it. Then said, the question is not whether Dr. Bennett committed the most extreme possible form of coercion. A pause. The question is whether a transplant chief repeatedly used medical expertise, marital pressure, confidential information, and recipient urgency to challenge a competent donor's right to refuse. That was harder to escape. Claire admitted calling me selfish. Admitted calling me cowardly. Admitted repeatedly telling me how safe donation was after I had already decided. Admitted trying to learn whether donor staff believed my fear was medically disproportionate. Admitted believing she could persuade me if she understood the hesitation correctly. Then Ortega asked, if Ryan had agreed after your fourth or fifth attempt to change his mind, would you have considered that consent fully voluntary? Claire started crying. Not dramatically. Just enough that she needed a moment. Then. At the time, yes. And now? No. That answer probably ended her transplant career. Not because it proved she had forced me. Because it showed how badly her understanding of voluntariness had shifted. She had started measuring consent by the final yes. Not by the process that produced it. The committee recessed at 1:10. Claire called me from the parking garage. I almost did not answer. Then I did. How bad? They're deciding. Okay. She laughed once. That's all you ever say now. What should I say? I don't know. Then. They asked if I would have accepted your consent if I gave enough pressure that you eventually agreed. I said nothing. I said yes. At the time? Yes. And now? No. That matters. I think it matters too late. Probably. She was quiet. Then. I finally understand why donor teams are separate. You knew the reason before. I knew the policy. That isn't the same. No. She breathed out. I thought separation protected nervous donors from emotional families. It does. I never imagined I would become the emotional family. That sentence landed. Claire had spent years identifying herself with the transplant team. The doctor. The person protecting standards. The person who understood the ethics better than frightened relatives. Then Ethan got sick. Daniel panicked. I matched. Suddenly Claire was not only the surgeon anymore. She was the person who desperately wanted a particular outcome. And she never adjusted for that. I asked. Do you still think I was selfish? No. Immediate. Do you think I should have donated? Longer pause. I think Ethan would have benefited medically. That wasn't the question. I know. Another pause. No. That was new. Why? Because if I say you should have, I'm still pretending the choice belonged partly to me. There it was. Finally. Not because donation became medically bad. Not because Ethan stopped deserving help. Because my body was not a committee decision. Claire whispered. I'm sorry. I know. Then she said. I won't call again after today unless you want me to. That surprised me. Why? Because every time I panic, I come to you and ask you to help me survive consequences from something I did to you. I sat silently. That's not fair, she said. No. So I'm stopping. That was probably the first boundary she created herself. At 3:42, the committee reconvened. At 5:18, the decision became official. North River permanently revoked Claire's transplant-specific privileges. Kidney transplant. Liver transplant. Living donor surgery. Transplant selection participation. Donor evaluation access. All gone. She retained general surgery and hepatobiliary privileges subject to a 12-month professional behavior monitoring plan. Her employment as chief of abdominal transplant surgery had already ended. Now the transplant career itself ended too. North River offered her a narrower attending surgeon position outside transplant medicine if she completed ethics remediation, privacy retraining, and independent professional evaluation. The university separately reviewed her faculty appointment. She could continue research temporarily. No transplant trainees under her direct supervision. No donor-related studies. The state medical board investigation remained open. Not a license revocation. Not yet. The hospital did something else important. It referred its own program failures to external oversight. Access controls were tightened. Recipient physicians could no longer open certain donor notes merely because they shared the same transplant episode. Withdrawal reasons became hidden behind donor team permissions. Conflict disclosures involving family, former partners, close personal relationships, or major financial relationships now required secondary review instead of relying on the physician's own interpretation. Donor advocates got a direct escalation line outside the transplant department. No chief could bury a concern by being the chief. Those changes mattered more to me than Claire losing a title. Because if the hospital learned only that Claire was bad, another Claire could appear later. If it learned the system had relied too much on prestige and informal trust, maybe the next donor would not need a complaint. At 6:05, Daniel texted me. First message in weeks. Ethan started dialysis today. I stared at the screen. No accusation. No request. Just fact. I felt sick. Not guilty. Not exactly. Sad. There is a difference. I replied. I'm sorry. I hope he gets a transplant soon. Daniel answered. Me too. That was all. The next morning, I learned Ethan had been activated on the deceased donor waiting list while another extended family member entered compatibility testing. North River had transferred his care fully to a new team. No Claire. No me. No special path. Just medicine. That was how it should have been from the beginning. Claire accepted North River's decision without internal appeal. Her attorney thought she had grounds to challenge the permanent transplant restriction. Not necessarily to win full restoration, but enough to force more process. She declined. When I asked why months later, she said, because I kept looking for technical ways to prove I could still be trusted before I had done anything to rebuild trust. That sounded right. The state medical board took longer. 4 months. They reviewed the hospital findings. My complaint. Claire's record accesses. The older cases. Her responses. They did not revoke her medical license. They issued a public reprimand and placed her under a 2-year consent agreement. Privacy education. Professional boundary training. Quarterly practice monitoring. No transplant practice during the agreement unless the board separately approved it, which North River's privileged decision already made largely academic. The reprimand would follow her. Credentialing applications. Hospital privileges. Future jobs. She could still be a doctor. Just not the doctor she had spent 18 years becoming. By then, our legal separation had become a divorce petition. Claire did not fight it. No accusations. No claim I abandoned her during professional crisis. No attempt to turn my refusal to donate into evidence of marital cruelty. We divided the house. Savings. Retirement accounts. Her physician compensation. My consulting business. Normal things. Painful things. Nothing compared with surgery. During mediation, her lawyer asked whether I wanted to include a confidentiality clause preventing Claire from discussing my donor evaluation publicly. I said yes. Not because I wanted to silence her apology. Because my kidney did not need to become part of her rehabilitation story. Claire agreed immediately. Then asked for a separate provision. No one could use Ethan's medical condition in any public explanation of our divorce beyond what was already lawfully public. I agreed too. He was still a kid. Still sick. Still not responsible for any adult's conduct. Our divorce became final 8 months after my first report. Outside the courthouse, Claire stopped beside me. She looked different. No white coat. No hospital badge. No phone buzzing every 30 seconds. What are you doing now? I asked. General surgery 3 days a week. At North River? For now. You like it? She thought about that. I'm learning to. That was probably honest. Then. I miss transplant every day. I know. I used to think that meant the punishment was too severe. And now? I think missing something doesn't prove you deserve it back. That was a hard sentence. A useful one. Then she looked at me. Do you regret reporting me? I did not answer quickly. Because the easy answer was no. The complete answer was more complicated. I regret that there was something to report. Claire closed her eyes. A tear slipped down. That's fair. I don't regret making sure my medical privacy was protected. No. I don't regret the hospital reviewing the older cases. No. I don't regret the program fixing its controls. She nodded. Then, do you regret not donating? That was the question. The one underneath everything. Ethan had been on dialysis for 8 months. Still waiting. I had both kidneys. Healthy. No surgery scars. No recovery. No medical consequences from donation because I never donated. I also knew exactly what a kidney might have meant to him. I answered honestly. Sometimes I wish I had wanted to. Claire looked at me. But I didn't. She started crying. I continued. And not wanting surgery still had to be enough. She nodded. Yes. For the first time, there was no argument after the word. No medical lecture. No child in need used as leverage. Just yes. Then she said goodbye. I watched her walk toward her car. People would eventually compress everything into one sentence. My doctor wife demanded my kidney for her ex's son. I refused. One report ended her career. It was a good story. Not quite the truth. The report did not end Claire's career. Her career changed because the report made people examine how many times a brilliant surgeon had decided that good intentions gave her permission to cross someone else's boundary. And the worst finding was not that Claire hated donor autonomy. It was that she believed in it. Until the person saying no stood between someone she loved and the outcome she wanted. Ethan Mercer received a kidney 11 months after I refused to give him mine. The donor was 24 years old. A man from Wisconsin who died after a motorcycle accident. I never learned his name. I was not supposed to. What I knew came from Daniel. At 2:13 one Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I almost ignored it. Then I saw his name. They found one. I sat up. My heart started beating harder. For Ethan? The reply came instantly. Yes. Surgery this morning. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then I typed. I hope it goes perfectly. I deleted it. Too polished. Tried again. I'm glad. Tell him I'm rooting for him. Daniel replied. I will. No accusation. No mention of my kidney. No reopening of anything. Just a sick kid finally getting what he needed. I did not sleep again. At 6, I went running. At 7:30, I made coffee. At 8, I opened my laptop and failed to read the same financial report 4 times. I had spent almost a year teaching myself that Ethan's disease was not my responsibility. That did not mean I had stopped caring whether he lived. At 11:46, Daniel texted again. Kidney is in. Good urine output already. Surgeon says everything looks strong. I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not guilt. Relief. Pure relief. A child I had been told might suffer because of my refusal had received another chance. And the fact that the kidney did not come from my body mattered more than I expected. Because it proved something I had intellectually understood but emotionally struggled to believe. My no had not condemned him. His treatment continued after me. The transplant system had not collapsed because one healthy compatible adult declined surgery. There were other pathways. Harder ones. Slower ones. Less certain ones. But they existed. That afternoon, Claire called. We had been divorced for 3 months. Her name still did something strange to my chest. Not love exactly. Not anger. History. I answered. You heard? Yes. Daniel called you? Yes. She went silent for a second. I'm glad. So am I. The kidney looked excellent. I paused. How do you know? Her silence answered before she did. Then, Daniel texted me. That was not necessarily improper anymore. Claire was no longer part of Ethan's medical team. She was also no longer prohibited from all personal contact with Daniel under the hospital's old internal restriction because that restriction had ended when she left transplant service. Still, I heard caution in her voice. Did you ask? No. Did he send details? Only that the surgery went well. Okay. She sounded relieved that I did not turn the conversation into an accusation. Then, I almost drove to the hospital. But I didn't. That mattered. Why? Because I realized wanting to see him wasn't the same as being entitled to. I closed my eyes. Claire Bennett was finally learning the hardest possible lesson for a surgeon. Care did not automatically create access. What did you do instead? Sent Daniel one message. What? Tell Ethan I'm thinking about him. No need to reply. That sounds right. I deleted 6 other versions first. I laughed. So there's hope. Minimal. We stayed on the phone longer than necessary. Then Claire said, I thought I'd feel worse. Why? Because he got transplanted without me. That sentence sounded ugly. She heard it too. I mean without my involvement. I know. I spent months believing the outcome would prove whether I'd been right to push. And? It proved the outcome was never mine. That was good. Ethan needed a kidney, she said. He did not specifically need Ryan Bennett's kidney. Exactly. I had spent a year trying to put that sentence into my own head. Hearing Claire say it made something settle. Then she whispered. I am so sorry. I did not ask which part. There were too many. The privacy. The pressure. The name-calling. The older donors. Daniel. The belief that saving Ethan justified borrowing rights from everyone around him. I know, I said. This time, that was enough. Ethan recovered well. No major rejection. No surgical complication. By 6 weeks, Daniel sent me a picture of him standing outside North River wearing a surgical mask and giving the camera 2 thumbs up. He looked thinner. Older. Alive. Under the photo. He said you'd want to know. I stared at that sentence. Then answered. Tell him I'm happy for him. A minute later. Tell him yourself. Then Ethan's number appeared. I hesitated before opening the message. Hey Ryan. Dad says adults made everything weird. Thanks for getting tested even though you said no. I'm good now. I laughed despite myself. Adults made everything weird. Probably the most accurate summary of the entire year. I replied. I'm really glad you're doing well. Take care of that kidney. He answered. Apparently I'm not allowed energy drinks anymore, so life is basically over. 16 years old. Still 16 years old. Good. That conversation mattered because Ethan never asked why I did not donate. Never accused me. Never treated me like the kidney that got away. The adults had done that. Not him. 2 months after Ethan's surgery, North River completed its external transplant program review. The report was ugly. Not catastrophic. Ugly. No evidence of widespread coerced donation. No invalid surgeries. No manipulated national allocation records. No conspiracy. Instead, it documented a culture that had become too dependent on informal relationships. Senior physicians could access more donor information than they needed. Staff hesitated to challenge prominent surgeons. Conflict disclosures relied too heavily on self-reporting without independent review. Donor advocates technically had independence but worked inside the same hierarchy as the people they might need to challenge. Claire's behavior had exploited those weaknesses. Not intentionally in some grand scheme. Habitually. That was enough. North River implemented 18 corrective actions. Access segmentation. Automatic alerts for donor chart access by recipient physicians. Quarterly audits. Independent donor advocacy reporting directly to hospital ethics rather than transplant leadership. Mandatory recusal review for close personal relationships. New documentation rules when appointment priority changed outside normal criteria. The transplant program kept its certification. But 2 administrators were formally counseled. A program manager resigned. The hospital received an external corrective action requirement. Claire was no longer the only person facing consequences. When the public summary came out, one sentence caught media attention. The review identified long-standing cultural deference to high-status clinical leaders that weakened donor privacy safeguards. Translation. People were afraid to tell Claire Bennett no. That made the story much larger than our marriage. Claire called me after reading it. I thought this was all me. It wasn't. That doesn't make me feel better. It shouldn't. She was quiet. I benefited from the culture. Yes. I also created some of it. Yes. But if they only blamed me, they wouldn't fix the rest. No. She exhaled. That's hard to admit. Why? Because losing everything feels easier if you can tell yourself everyone else was fine. I understood. If Claire was uniquely bad, then the system had been healthy until she failed. If the system had weaknesses too, then her fall was part of something messier. She was responsible. North River was responsible. Staff had responsibilities. Daniel had pushed. I had initially agreed to screening partly because I wanted to avoid conflict. Everyone had choices. Not equal choices, but choices. The report did not distribute blame equally. It distributed it accurately. That mattered. Then Claire's employment review reached its own conclusion. North River would allow her to remain as a general and hepatobiliary surgeon. But not in her old department. Not with her old title. Not on the transplant floor. No leadership role for at least 3 years. Annual professional boundary review. The university also decided not to renew her transplant-focused endowed faculty appointment. She could remain on faculty at a lower academic rank if she accepted reassignment. Claire declined. Not dramatically. She resigned from North River. That surprised me. You're leaving medicine? No. Then why resign? I can't spend every day walking past the transplant unit pretending I'm not looking at the doors. Where are you going? St. Catherine Medical Center. I knew it. Smaller hospital south of Minneapolis. Strong general surgery service. No transplant program. Doing what? Hepatobiliary surgery. Complex gallbladder cases. Pancreatic surgery. General emergency call. That's a big change. Yes. You okay with that? No. At least she was honest. Then. But I think I need a place where nobody cares who I used to be. That sounded healthy. Pay cut? She laughed bitterly. 40%. Ouch. I'll survive. She would. Claire had earned well for years. The money was not the real loss. Prestige was. At North River, she had walked down hallways where fellows stepped aside. People called her chief. Families searched her name online. At St. Catherine, she would be one attending among 12. No transplant program. No endowed chair. No department built around her. She started in September. 3 weeks later, she sent me one message. A 26-year-old resident corrected me in the OR today. I replied. Were they right? Her answer came 5 minutes later. Unfortunately. Then. I said thank you. I smiled. Progress. Her state medical board monitoring continued. Quarterly reports. No new privacy problems. No professional boundary complaints. No unauthorized records. After 1 year, the board reduced the frequency of monitoring. After 2, the consent agreement ended. The public reprimand remained. It always would. Credentialing applications still asked. Claire answered. No minimizing. No blaming North River. No blaming me. That was part of how she rebuilt. Daniel eventually apologized too. Not immediately. Nearly a year after Ethan's transplant. We met by accident in a coffee shop near downtown Minneapolis. He saw me first. For a moment, both of us considered pretending we had not. Then he walked over. Ryan. Daniel. How are you? Fine. Ethan's doing great. I'm glad. He's playing hockey again. That seems medically suspicious. Daniel laughed. Then became serious. I owe you something. I knew what was coming. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He sat across from me. I treated you like saying no made you responsible for what happened next. I said nothing. I was terrified. I know. That doesn't excuse it. No. I let Claire tell me things I should have realized were private. Yes. I wanted the information. That was important. He was not pretending Claire had forced it on him. I kept asking whether there was anything we could do to change your mind. I assumed. I told her you had no idea what dialysis would do to Ethan. I looked at him. That sounds like something she repeated. It was. There it was. Pressure had not come from one source. Daniel fed Claire's urgency. Claire carried it home. I absorbed it. I'm sorry, he said. I accept. He looked surprised. That easy? No. But simple. He nodded. Then. Ethan asked me once whether you hated him. My chest tightened. What did you say? That you never did. Good. He said he figured. I smiled. Kids again. Smarter than all of us. Before leaving, Daniel said. I thought because you were healthy and compatible, the moral question was obvious. And now? Now I think I was asking someone else to pay the price because I couldn't. That was brutally honest. I would have given him mine. I know. But mine wasn't safe enough. I know. And I turned that into anger at you. Yes. He nodded. I'm working on it. Then he left. I sat there for a while. For almost 2 years, the entire story had revolved around whether I was selfish for keeping something I was born with. Eventually, everyone involved had to confront the same truth. A kidney can save a life. That makes donation extraordinary. It does not make refusal immoral by default. If it did, every healthy person walking around with 2 functioning kidneys would owe one to someone. We do not believe that. We believe donation means something precisely because it is voluntary. Claire had lost the career she loved because she forgot that when the stakes became personal. 2 years after my report, she was still a surgeon. A good one. Maybe a better doctor in some ways. But she would never again lead a transplant program. Never again sit across from a living donor and speak with the authority of the chief. Never again operate inside the field that had defined her adult life. One report had not erased her ability to practice medicine. It had ended the version of her career built on people trusting that Dr. Claire Bennett understood exactly where a donor's rights began. She had broken that trust. And some things, once broken, can be repaired enough to build another life, without ever returning to what they were before. 3 years after I filed the report, Claire stopped introducing herself as a transplant surgeon. Not because she had forgotten what she used to be. Because saying it had started sounding like claiming a title she no longer held. At St. Catherine Medical Center, she built a different kind of career. Slower. Less famous. More ordinary. She became known for difficult pancreatic cases, bile duct injuries, complicated emergency surgery, and the kind of operations that required patience more than prestige. No transplant floor. No donor meetings. No television interviews. No fellows waiting outside her office. For the first year, she hated almost every minute of it. I knew because we still spoke occasionally. Not often. Maybe once every 2 months. Usually because something practical connected us. A tax document. Mail forwarded from the old house. A retirement account that needed one final signature. Then, gradually, the practical reasons disappeared and some conversations remained anyway. Not marriage. Not friendship exactly. Something calmer. One evening she called after finishing a 14-hour shift. I lost a case today. I sat up. What happened? Pancreatic cancer. Extensive vascular involvement. We knew it was high risk. I'm sorry. She made it through surgery. Claire's voice was flat. Then developed catastrophic bleeding 12 hours later. I said nothing. She continued. The family asked if there was anything else we could do. That's hard. I said no. That answer sounded simple. It was not. Claire whispered. I used to hate saying that. I know. I thought no meant I had failed. And now? I think sometimes no is the most honest thing a doctor can say. That was a different Claire. Not better because she had become less ambitious. Better because she had finally stopped treating every limit as an enemy. She told me about the family. How they cried. How the patient's husband asked whether another surgery might work. How Claire had to explain that more intervention would probably create more suffering without meaningful chance of survival. Then she said, I kept thinking about you. I knew why. Don't. I'm not making it about us. Okay. I just finally understood how terrifying it is when someone wants you to say yes and you know no is still the right answer. I stared at the dark window. Different situation. Yes. But I understood the pressure differently. That was fair. She continued. I spent years believing people came to doctors because they wanted us to defeat uncertainty. Sometimes. But sometimes our job is to protect their right to live inside it. That line stayed with me. Maybe because 3 years earlier, Claire had been unable to tolerate my uncertainty. She wanted a kidney. A plan. A surgery date. An outcome. No room for a healthy person saying, I don't want this. Now she was learning to leave space around answers she disliked. That did not restore us. It made her someone I could speak to without feeling managed. Ethan was 19 by then. His transplant function remained good. He had finished high school and enrolled at the University of Minnesota. Daniel sent me a picture when he moved into the dorms. Ethan standing beside a mountain of boxes. One hand on his hip. The other holding a sign his dad made. 1 kidney. 0 organizational skills. I laughed. Then noticed something else. Claire was not in the picture. Not because Daniel hated her. Because she had deliberately stepped back. Months earlier, Ethan had reached out to her himself. He invited her to lunch. Claire asked me afterward whether I wanted to know what they discussed. No. She looked surprised. Really? That relationship is between you and him. That was apparently the correct answer. Later, Ethan told me part of it anyway. We met when he came home for Thanksgiving. He looked healthy. Still thin. Still hockey obsessed. But no dialysis lines. No transplant masks. Just a college kid complaining about chemistry. He asked, "Can I ask you something weird?" "Probably. Did Claire almost lose her license because of you?" I looked at him. "No." He frowned. "Dad said you filed the report." "I did." "So. The report caused a review. That sounds lawyerish." "It is." He smiled. Then I continued. "What happened to Claire's license was decided by the medical board based on what she did. She kept it." "Yes. But she lost transplant." "Yes. Because she read your file?" "That was part of it." He looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know she told Dad stuff." "You were 16. I still feel weird." "You shouldn't." "Why?" "Because you did not ask her to break rules." He looked down. "My dad did." "Your dad was desperate." "He says that doesn't excuse it." "He's right." Ethan nodded. Then, Claire apologized to me. For what? For making my illness into an emergency everyone else had to solve. That was a strong sentence. "What did you say?" "I told her it kind of was an emergency." I laughed. "What did she say?" "She said medical emergency and moral ownership aren't the same thing." That sounded exactly like something she had learned the expensive way. Ethan continued. "She said she treated everyone around me like parts of a treatment plan. Daniel. Me. Donor advocates. Coordinators. Schedulers. Even Claire herself. Everyone reduced to what they could do to get Ethan transplanted. She told me she was sorry if that ever made me feel like a burden." I looked at him. "Did it?" "Sometimes." That surprised me. "How?" He shrugged. "When adults talk about who can save you all the time, you start wondering whether people are scared to be around you because you might need something." I had never thought about that. Neither had Claire, probably. She said she should have protected me from that too. That sounds right. Ethan stared at his drink. "Do you still hate her?" "No." "Did you?" "For a while." "Because of the kidney?" "Because she stopped accepting that my body belonged to me." He nodded slowly. Then, "Would you donate now?" The question landed differently at 19 than it had at 16. I answered honestly. "No." He looked at me. "Still?" "Yes." No guilt. No explanation. Just yes. Ethan nodded. "Okay. That was it. No disappointment. No accusation." Then he smiled. "Good thing I already got one. Very convenient." We moved on. That conversation did something I did not expect. It closed the last part of the story I had still been arguing inside myself. For years, I had imagined some future moment when Ethan might ask me directly and I would have to justify why I kept both kidneys. When the moment finally came, he did not demand justification. He accepted the answer faster than Claire ever had. Maybe because he had lived through the consequences and understood better than all of us that no one person had been his only chance. Claire's professional life kept changing too. St. Catherine offered her a section director role in hepatobiliary surgery after 4 years. She initially refused. Then the hospital president asked why. Her answer apparently became part of the committee discussion. "I'm not afraid of leadership," she said. "I'm afraid of wanting it for the wrong reason." They gave her 3 months to think. She accepted under conditions she proposed herself. Independent peer review of complaints. No unilateral control over credentialing decisions involving close colleagues. Quarterly quality meetings where junior staff could raise safety concerns without going through her first. And a written recusal policy stricter than the hospital required. Someone sent me the announcement. Dr. Claire Bennett named Director of Hepatobiliary Surgery at St. Catherine Medical Center. For a moment, old instincts appeared. Pride. Then sadness. Then the strange urge to tell someone I had known her before any of this. Instead, I sent one message. "Congratulations." She replied. "Thank you. This one feels different." I knew what she meant. The title was smaller. The structure around it was stronger. A year later, North River invited her back. Not as a transplant surgeon. As part of a hospital ethics symposium on donor autonomy. Claire almost declined. Then accepted. I did not attend. Melissa Grant did. She called me afterward. You should know she handled it well. I didn't ask. I know. Then why tell me? Because I think you'd want to know anyway. She was right. What did Claire say? Melissa paused. She showed the standard living donor pathway. Independent evaluation. Private advocate. Medical clearance. Right to withdraw. Then Claire said. Every one of these protections existed when my husband was evaluated. I closed my eyes. She used me. Not by name. Still. She admitted she knew every rule. That mattered. Melissa continued. She said the problem was not lack of policy. What was it? She believed her motives placed her above the need for the policy. That was exactly right. Then Claire apparently said. I was trying to save a teenager I cared about. That motive was real. So were the donor's rights. Good motives do not cancel competing rights. Another pause. The most dangerous thing I told myself was that because my preferred outcome was medically better for the recipient, resistance to that outcome was something I was entitled to investigate. I sat silently. Melissa continued. She talked about you withdrawing. What did she say? That the donor said no. Nothing more. No selfish. No fear. No anatomy. No private reason. Just no. Then. And I treated that answer as unfinished. That sentence was probably the entire case. A competent adult said no. Claire heard. Not yet. Explain. Convince. Reframe. Fix. That was where everything went wrong. Melissa said. At the end, someone asked whether the report destroyed her career. I leaned forward. What did she say? She said no. Of course. What exactly? Melissa laughed softly. You'll like this. Then she quoted as best she remembered. The report did not end my career. My own documented conduct ended my transplant career. The report made it possible for people who were not emotionally invested in my preferred outcome to review what I had done. I smiled despite myself. Accurate language. Always useful eventually. Then Melissa added. She also said losing transplant medicine may have been necessary for her to become someone who could be trusted in leadership again. That was harder. Not because I disagreed. Because it sounded true. The report had not reduced Claire to nothing. She still operated. Still taught. Still cared for patients. Still made mistakes. Still rebuilt. But transplant surgery stayed closed to her. Permanently by choice, even after some regulatory restrictions later expired. North River never restored privileges. She never applied elsewhere. When a recruiter from a transplant center in Arizona contacted her years later, she declined without interview. I asked why. She said, because wanting back what I lost is not the same as being entitled to try again. Maybe she could have rebuilt enough for someone to consider her. Maybe not. She decided the question did not need testing. That was one more no she finally knew how to respect. As for me, life became quieter. I sold the consulting company I had built with 2 partners and stayed on part-time. Bought a smaller house near Lake Minnetonka. Started dating again. Slowly. No dramatic new love. No perfect woman arriving to prove Claire had been wrong. Real life did not owe me that kind of symmetry. Then I met Hannah Cole. She was a civil engineer. Divorced. Blunt. Had no connection to medicine. On our 4th date, she asked why my marriage ended. I gave her the short version. My ex-wife was a transplant surgeon. I got evaluated to donate a kidney to someone she cared about. I declined. She did not handle my no appropriately. Hannah stared at me. That sounds like the understatement of the century. Probably. Did she actually want your kidney? Yes. And you still have both? Yes. She raised her glass. Strong boundary work. I laughed. That was how something once enormous began becoming just part of my history. Not my identity. Not the first thing people needed to know. Years after I filed the report, I realized that was what accountability had eventually given all of us. Ethan was no longer the sick boy everyone had to save. Daniel was no longer the desperate father looking for someone to blame. Claire was no longer the transplant chief who thought every no was a medical obstacle. And I was no longer the compatible donor who had to defend keeping his own organ. We became people again. Separate from the roles fear had assigned us. That did not make what happened less serious. It made the consequences finally useful. Because Claire's career did not end when I reported her. One version of it did. The version built on the assumption that expertise gave her permission to decide which boundaries mattered. The doctor who remained had to learn something harder than surgery. A patient can refuse. A donor can refuse. A subordinate can disagree. A colleague can escalate. A person you love can say no. And none of those answers become less valid just because you desperately wish they were yes. 8 years after I refused to donate my kidney, Ethan Mercer got married. I was invited. That surprised me. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope with my name handwritten on the front. Not Mr. and Guest. Not Ryan Bennett and family. Just me. Inside was a short note from Ethan. You were part of the worst year of my life, but not in the way everyone thought. I'd like you there for one of the best. I read it twice. Then sent him one text. I'll be there. Hannah came with me. By then, we had been married for 2 years. Nothing dramatic about it. Small ceremony. No hospital people. No transplant story in the vows. Just 2 adults who had both learned that a relationship worked better when no one treated disagreement like an emergency. Ethan's wedding was outside Stillwater, Minnesota. He looked healthy. Not healthy for a transplant patient. Healthy. 24 years old. Broad shoulders. Terrible tie. Nervous smile. His kidney function had stayed stable through college and into adulthood. He worked in biomedical engineering, which felt either deeply appropriate or extremely ironic. Daniel cried before the ceremony even started. I saw him wiping his face behind a tree. Pretended I didn't. Then I saw Claire. She stood near the back of the gathering. No white coat. No hospital badge. No professional reason to be there. Just invited. For the first time since our divorce, seeing her did not create any tension in my chest. She looked older. So did I. She had gray at her temples now. It suited her. Hannah noticed me looking. That her? Yes. You okay? Yes. Want me to bite her? I laughed. No. Offer stands. Claire saw us a few minutes later. She approached carefully. Not hesitant exactly. Respectful. Ryan. Claire. Then I introduced Hannah. They shook hands. Claire smiled. I've heard good things. Hannah raised an eyebrow. From who? Ryan once told Ethan you're the only person he knows who can turn a boundary into a joke. I stared at her. When did I say that? You didn't. Ethan summarized. That sounded more plausible. Hannah smiled. Then Ethan gets too much credit. The conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. No old marriage archaeology. No apologies. No need. Then Claire said. I'm glad you came. So am I. She nodded. And walked away. That was it. 8 years earlier, Claire had treated Ethan's illness like a force powerful enough to reorder everyone around it. Now he was getting married, and none of us needed to orbit the past. The ceremony was simple. When Ethan's wife placed the ring on his hand, Daniel cried harder. Claire did too. So did I. Hannah handed me a tissue without looking at me. After dinner, Ethan came over. You came. You invited me. I wasn't sure. Why? He shrugged. Thought maybe it'd be weird. It is weird. Fair. Then he looked toward Claire. She's doing okay. I know. She helped me with nothing medical. I smiled. That sounds intentional. It was. He laughed. Then became serious. I wanted to tell you something. Okay. I used to think the whole story was about whether you should have donated. I waited. It isn't. No. I get that now. What changed? He looked toward the dance floor. My wife. That surprised me. She made me think about it differently. How? She asked me whether I'd expect her to donate if I needed another kidney someday. I felt my stomach tighten. And? I said I hoped she would. Reasonable. Then she asked whether I'd be angry if she said no. There it was. What did you say? At first? He smiled awkwardly. Yes. Then? I realized that was the problem. He looked at me. If someone's allowed to say no only when the answer doesn't hurt you, they're not really allowed to say no. That sentence sounded almost too mature for him. Then again, Ethan had spent half his adolescence watching adults learn it the hard way. I wish all of us understood that earlier, I said. Me too. He paused. Dad says the same. That surprised me more than it should have. Daniel had changed too. Not perfectly. But enough. Then Ethan asked, "Do you still have both kidneys?" I laughed. "Yes." "Good. You sound disappointed." "No. I'm just checking whether all that drama at least preserved the inventory." "Very funny." He hugged me. Briefly. Then went back to his wife. I stood there for a while afterward. For years, I had thought the story would end when someone finally proved I was right. The hospital. The medical board. Claire herself. It did not. It ended when the questions stopped mattering. I had said no. That had been enough. Everything after was about whether other people could accept it. Claire eventually became chief of surgery at St. Catherine. Not transplant chief. Not the same career. Something new. She built a reputation there that had little to do with North River. Residents described her as demanding but unusually careful about consent and escalation. A nurse once told a reporter, "Dr. Bennett is the only surgeon I know who will stop a meeting and ask, 'Who has the least power in this room, and have we heard them yet?'" I saw the quote online. It sounded like someone who had learned the answer expensively. She never hid the reprimand. When credentialing committees asked, she disclosed it. When young surgeons asked why she left transplant medicine, she answered, "Not all details. Not my private medical information. Just enough. I violated donor privacy and failed to respect a donor's refusal." That was how she described it. No mention that the donor was her husband unless the setting specifically addressed dual relationships. No mention of Ethan unless necessary. No self-mythology. Eventually, the story stopped sounding like confession and started sounding like history. That mattered. The state medical board removed all active monitoring years earlier. North River never invited her back into transplant practice. She never asked. She published a paper instead. Not medical outcomes. Ethics. The title was, "When Clinical Benefit Conflicts with Voluntary Refusal, Limits of Physician Advocacy in Living Donation." I did not read the whole thing. I read the abstract. One line stood out. "The ethical strength of voluntary donation depends not on the generosity of yes, but on the protected legitimacy of no." That was probably the sentence Claire had spent the rest of her career trying to learn. Daniel remarried eventually. Moved to Duluth. Ethan stayed in Minneapolis. The donor family who gave Ethan his kidney remained anonymous for years, then later agreed to contact. Ethan met the donor's parents when he was 22. He told me about it once. I didn't know what to say. "What did you say?" "Thank you. That seems enough." They said their son had checked the donor box when he got his license. I nodded. Ethan looked down. He chose it before anybody needed him to. That mattered too. Consent before urgency. Choice before pressure. The gift had been real because it had remained his to give. Years later, I understood why that affected me so much. Claire had once told me, "You have 2 kidneys." As though arithmetic created duty. The young man whose kidney saved Ethan also had 2. He chose to donate after death. I chose not to donate while living. Both choices belonged to the people whose bodies carried them. One was generous. The other was simply mine. Neither required permission. Hannah and I never had children. That was not tragedy. Just life. We traveled. Worked. Built a quiet house near the lake. She still made terrible jokes about my high-value organ portfolio. Every annual physical, she asked whether I had maintained both assets. I pretended to hate it. I didn't. Because humor is what memory becomes when it no longer owns you. Then, 12 years after the original report, North River contacted me one last time. They were redesigning donor advocate training. Not because of Claire alone. Because the external review had eventually become part of a national discussion about donor team independence. They asked whether I would record a short anonymous statement about what protected refusal felt like from the donor side. I agreed on one condition. No details identifying Claire. No details identifying Ethan. No retelling of my marriage. They accepted. I sat in a small studio and looked into a camera. The interviewer asked, "What should living donors understand before evaluation?" I answered, "That evaluation is not a promise. What should families understand? That compatibility does not create obligation. What should clinicians understand?" I thought about Claire. Then, that their belief about the best medical outcome does not give them ownership over someone else's risk. The interviewer paused. And what should donor advocates understand? That sometimes the most important part of the job is making sure no remains a complete sentence. That clip was eventually used in training. Anonymous. Good. I did not need my name attached. The lesson mattered more. A few months later, Claire sent me one email. Subject line. Saw the training. The body was short. You said it better than I did. I replied. Took us long enough. She answered. Yes. That was our final conversation about the kidney. Not because we stopped speaking forever. Because there was nothing left to explain. Claire's transplant career had ended. Her medical career had not. Our marriage ended. My life did not. Ethan needed a kidney. He got one. Daniel panicked. He learned. North River failed to enforce some of its own safeguards. It changed them. One report connected all of those things. But it did not create them. That was the truth people kept shortening. My doctor wife demanded my kidney for her ex's son, called me selfish. One report ended her career. Good headline. Incomplete truth. The report did not end Claire Bennett's career. It forced other people to examine a pattern she had spent years convincing herself was justified by good outcomes. The hospital ended her transplant privileges. The medical board reprimanded her. Claire eventually chose not to return to that field. Those consequences belonged to her actions. Not to my refusal. Not to Ethan's illness. Not to one sheet of paper. And if there was one thing I understood by the end, it was this. The hardest boundary to respect is often the one standing between you and something good. A child getting a kidney is good. A patient surviving is good. A doctor wanting to help is good. Love can be good. None of those things make every method acceptable. Claire forgot that. For a while. Then she learned. So did Daniel. So did North River. So did I. And years after everyone stopped arguing about whether I should have given away part of my body, I realized the greatest thing that report protected was not my kidney. It protected the idea that my answer belonged to me. That was worth keeping. Both kidneys were just a bonus. That's all for today. Remember to subscribe and support us.